In practice, things are not always as simple or straightforward as we'd like them to be. The insights from all the models we've learned previously still apply, but it does not mean that they should be used blindly. Supply chains cross multiple geographies, time zones, cultures, political boundaries, currencies, and firms. Things do not always operate the same way across the globe. People don't always behave like we want them to. Large systems are complex and are rarely stable. Remember, the best laid plans of mice and men will sometimes go awry, and unexpected things happen in supply chains every single day. So the objective of this course, SC3X, is to better prepare you for how supply chains operate and behave in practice. So let's dive in with a couple of examples. This first one is from a project that I worked on. In the year 2000, a large retailer, I'll call them Shopko, decided to renegotiate all of its long-haul trucking contracts in a national competitive bid. Now, this is common practice for most companies procuring truckload transportation. We used a then new optimization-based procurement process that assigned carriers to lanes in order to minimize the total transportation cost. Makes sense, it's a pretty standard practice. At that time, though, the vast majority of Shopko's imported goods coming from China and the Pacific Rim entered the United States solely through the ports of LA and Long Beach. Now, also, when we looked at this, we were trying to figure out the transportation that would haul the business from the port as well as all the other moves within the United States. And so the lowest cost solution that we came up with, while considering carrier performance, incumbency, and all the other level of service calculations, ended up recommending that all the shipments coming out of the port be assigned to a single truckload carrier. So this reduced the total costs. In the past, excellent service of this carrier really helped in the decision-making process. So this was the lowest cost solution. All the goods coming into a single port or a single set of ports, all of the loads being hauled out of that through one carrier. All the eggs in one basket. And so, as you might guess, the situation was not stable. In the fall of 2002, there was a port strike for the entire west coast of the United States, and it lasted almost 2 weeks. This was the first strike there in 30 years. Shopko was caught short, along with almost every other shipper bringing things in, since much of its product ready for the Christmas selling season was stuck off the coast in ships that could not unload. So the network design decision, single point of entry, single carrier out, while being low cost in the steady state, was not flexible enough for this disruption. Now, following this event, they recovered. They found a way to get through that, but following this, they changed their approach. And at a slightly higher total cost, they started using a number of different ports coming into the West Coast, the Gulf Coast, and the East Coast to bring the product into the U.S. They also started diversifying their assignment from each port to multiple carriers. So this is more dual sourcing and having redundancy. So the lesson here is that supply chains rarely operate in a steady state world. There are always changes and disruptions, and a good supply chain design needs to consider this. And sometimes the lowest cost in a blue sky, nothing better change kind of set of assumptions, that solution is actually a higher cost solution. Okay, let's look at another couple examples. This is dealing with network design, and when the right location, determined by a network design model, isn't really the right location. And so, as you know, network design and facility location models look to minimize the total cost in establishing facility locations and flows of materials, and they typically consider fixed and variable costs, such as transportation, handling, and labor. But in real life, there are many considerations that these traditional models just can't consider. For example, countries are not passive agents when it comes to supply chains. They have tariffs, taxes, and other factors that are usually determined politically and for other reasons that should be, but aren't always, considered when designing a supply chain network. These can have a larger effect than the actual supply chain costs and can have significant influence over the network design. For example, guess where 16 of the 20 top-selling drugs in the U.S. are processed or manufactured? So if you look at this, all of the United States, where do you think the location is? Puerto Rico. Why? It certainly isn't the center location. You wouldn't use Weber to figure this location out. It's not because of the labor. It's not because of the lowest costs. It was mainly due to the federal tax incentive known as Section 936. Now, this incentive allowed U.S.-based manufacturers to send all profits from local plants to stateside parent plants without having to pay any federal taxes. Now, that Section 936 has since expired, but what it did, it essentially jump-started that industry, and it had a huge impact in establishing the pharmaceuticals industry there. Let me give you another example. Let's look at Europe and consider Ireland. Ireland is home to 18 of the world's top 25 medical device manufacturers. 80% of the world's cardiovascular stents and 1/3 of all contact lenses are made there. Why? Many argue that the tax rate is low, 12.5%, and transparent, but now there's more to it. So just like Puerto Rico, a lot of incentives were given to get companies there, but once that happens, it's like a flywheel. And so now there's a very talented labor pool there for this industry, as well as an abundance of suppliers to support this industry. So this is an example of a cluster effect. As more medical device manufacturers move in, it becomes more attractive to other medical device manufacturers and those other people in similar or parallel industries. So this happens a lot. Look at Silicon Valley in California, for example. So the geographic location and distance to markets are not the only or primary factors for a lot of facility locations. One final example. Let's look at Brazil. Brazil has 26 states, and each one has its own set of taxes and duties. The ICMS, state tax on circulation of goods, differs state by state, up to 19% for Rio de Janeiro. Now, this makes network design in Brazil very tricky. There are layers of rules that impact the prices and duties paid, and they differ state by state. Brazil is not alone here, of course. These effects are present globally to differing degrees. So the lesson here, there's more to location than proximity to your suppliers and to your market. And the taxes, customs, duties can often outweigh and overwhelm the supply chain costs, so they need to be considered. So the real world's messy. And in this course, what we want to do is help you better understand how to navigate that mess. So this is what we're going to be doing in the course. We essentially divide the course into two. The first 4 weeks, we'll kind of focus on tools and ways of thinking about the business. We'll start in week 1, talk about supply chains as systems. I'll introduce the idea of complexity, and we'll talk about system dynamics, which is a great discipline to help you understand and think a little richer about how your company, how your supply chain operates in this larger ecosystem. In week 2, we'll introduce the idea of processes. We'll focus in on simple processes first and analyze them and understand how to analyze an individual simple process. And then we'll focus in on process mapping and look at more complex supply chain processes. In week 3, we'll focus on strategy. I'll give a primer on basic strategy frameworks, and then we'll dive into how supply chain should align to those strategies. Then we'll have a midterm to kind of cover those concepts. And then the second half, we're going to go to more practical things. In week 5 and 6, Dr. Bruce Arnson is going to come and talk about global supply chain management and all those different things that make global supply chains more complicated, some of the real concepts that come through. Now, what he's not going to do is focus in on the current state of tariffs and duties, since they change every day, literally. But rather what he'll do is focus in on the underlying concepts. Okay, and then in week 7, Professor Yossi Sheffi will come in and talk about risk and resilience and try to understand and explain how companies can improve their resilience and manage the risk. We'll finish the course up with a final exam. So this is what we're going to be doing over the next 8 weeks, and so let's get started.